January. And since yesterday was the 6th of January, that means that yesterday was the Feast of the Epiphany. Yesterday was Three Kings Day, exactly. Yes, yesterday was a high and holy Christian holiday. And one of the things that we like to do in our Wednesday night class is we go through what we call holiday history. We've done this for Christmas. We've done this for Thanksgiving. We've done it for Easter. We've done it even for Halloween. And so we've covered kind of the major holidays that most of us care about and think about. This year, I have a whole list of holidays that we're going to cover throughout the year. And this is the very first one. Right at the beginning of the year, it is the Feast of the Epiphany. It is the holiday. Some places it's known as the Theophany. We'll talk about that a little bit more. But basically, what I'm here to tell us today is that this ancient feast is just that. It is an ancient feast that we are going to learn about. It is a Christian celebration that goes way, 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 way back. Even back before Christmas, there is evidence that Christians were celebrating what we now call the Epiphany, even prior to celebrating Christmas. So this is a big deal. It is a major holiday on the Christian calendar, and we're going to talk about it and hopefully learn a lot about it. Most of us, I think, come from a tradition where we don't really pay attention to the liturgical calendar at all. And so this is a new thing for me. I don't really know much about it, but over the last year or so, I've been paying a lot closer attention to the liturgical calendar and trying to incorporate these things into my life a little bit more. And part of that is observing all these various Christian holidays that have been celebrated for centuries and learning about them. And so I want to share some of that with you tonight. We're going to be looking at the Epiphany, and we're going to answer 4 different questions tonight. What is Epiphany? What does that even mean? What is it? What are we talking about? Second of all, who celebrates this holiday? And the answer, short list, is basically everybody, right? So, and what is its history is the third question. When did this start? How has it progressed? And then I want to look at the last question, which is, what are some of the traditions that surround the Epiphany? And this part I find to be very interesting. There's going to be some things in here that I learned that were new for me. Maybe they'll be new for you as well when we get to the traditions around this. But to answer the first question is simply this. What is Epiphany? Now, Epiphany comes from the Greek word epiphania, which means to make revelation or to make something manifest. It's like an unveiling. Like when someone says, I've had an epiphany. That means there has been a manifestation of like an idea, like something has clicked, like the veil has been lifted and it's been revealed, basically. And that's the basic idea of Epiphany. It's the idea of revelation. It's the idea of manifestation. And what the Feast of Epiphany is really celebrating is Christ and his manifestation to the world. It's a celebration of the manifestation of Christ. And it focuses on 3 different events in the life of Christ. 2 major ones and 1 kind of minor one. The minor one, just to get it out of the way, is Jesus' very first miracle, when he turned the water into wine at the wedding in Cana. This is part of the manifestation of the power of Christ, when Christ revealed himself to be divine to his disciples. He revealed his divine qualities to his disciples in this first miracle of turning the water into wine. That's kind of a minor aspect. There's 2 other aspects that are major. So the first thing where it all kind of started was this epiphany of Christ being the Son of God in his baptism. So without getting too far ahead of myself, what you basically have is in this time of year, you have the celebration of the nativity of Christ, that is his birth, which we call Christmas. You also had the celebration of the visiting of the wise men and the baptism of Jesus, all in the same time period happening. And today, the way that this is all parsed out is you have Christmas on December 25th, and then you have the Epiphany, which is the celebration mostly of the wise men on January the 6th, and then the following Sunday, which for us would be next Sunday, is actually the celebration of Jesus' baptism. So where these things used to all kind of be celebrated all at once, we have kind of separated them out into their own distinct things. But what I want us to understand is that they're all connected. The nativity, the visitation of the wise men, and the baptism of Jesus are all connected in this time of year as us celebrating the revelation or the manifestation of Jesus Christ to humanity. So, of course, the celebration of the wise men, we are celebrating the revelation of Christ to the Gentiles. Because we talked about this the last class we had. The wise men were Gentiles. They were basically Babylonian astronomers is basically what they were. They recognized the Messiah. They came to pay homage and to worship him, as it were. So Christ revealed himself to the Gentiles, to the wise men. But in his baptism, which is another central part of this celebration, of course, what do we know about Jesus' baptism? Why do we think the baptism fits into this? What do you guys think? When we're thinking about the manifestation of Christ as the Son of God, why would his baptism play into that? Exactly. Exactly. When Jesus is baptized, heavens open up, the Spirit descends upon him like as a dove, and then the voice from heaven speaks, right? And what does the voice from heaven say? This is exactly. So Christ is revealed to be the Son of God to all of Judea, to the Jews in particular, in his baptism. So in this feast of the Epiphany, the manifestation of Christ, we celebrate these three different things. He manifests himself to the Jews in his baptism, when the Father speaks from heaven and says, "This is my Son." He manifests himself to the Gentiles and the wise men in the signs in the heavens. And he also manifests himself to his disciples in that initial miracle in Cana. So that is what the Epiphany is. These are the things that it is celebrating. In the East, amongst the Eastern Orthodox in particular, this festival is known as the Theophany, which is the manifestation of God, right? You take that word theos and then you connect it to the word epiphany and you have the theophany. It is the revelation of God. And so it's the same festival. It just goes by a different name in the East. We do things a little bit different in the West. We'll talk about that in a moment. And in some traditions, like for instance the Anglican tradition or the Episcopalian tradition, it also marks the beginning of the season of Epiphany. So not only is Epiphany a day, a holy day, but it also marks an entire season in the liturgical calendar. Like you have the Easter season, you have the season of Advent, you have the season of Lent, you have the Christmas season. Well, you also have the season of Epiphany. And that's not common to every calendar, but in most Protestant calendars, that is the case. There is a season of Epiphany. And so that's pretty much everything that it is. Any questions, thoughts, or comments so far? Are we learning anything? How many people have ever heard of this holiday before? You've heard about it?
Three Kings Day was bigger than Christmas.
Three Kings Day, yeah.
With Hispanics.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
You may get a few gifts on Christmas, but on Three Kings Day.
Yeah, that's the blowout. And in a lot of South American places, particularly, and even Southern European places, this is the case. Yeah.
Isn't it more prevalent in the Catholic Church?
Yes, definitely.
And a lot of this South American countries are
Yeah.
Catholic.
Yeah, it's definitely a major holiday in the Catholic Church. It is especially, it's like the third major holiday in the Eastern Orthodox. So in the Eastern Orthodox Church, the only holidays bigger than the Epiphany is Easter and Pentecost. Yeah, so Easter is a huge one. That's the biggest one. Pentecost is a huge one in Eastern Orthodoxy. But then the Theophany or the Epiphany is the next one. It's even bigger than Christmas. It's bigger than the Nativity. In the West, for us, probably Christmas is the biggest one, followed by Easter, and then probably the Epiphany would be after that.
Do you think it's the biggest one because of the commercialization of it?
What's that?
Christmas.
Christmas? I wouldn't even, so in a secular context, sure, yeah, but even as a religious holiday, I would say that Christmas is the biggest holiday in Western Christianity.
Because you would think Easter would trump it all.
Yeah, and so that would be the argument. Well, is it Christmas or is it Easter? And I would still say probably Christmas, at least in my mind, like to me personally, I guess, I don't know. But the beginning of Advent is the beginning of the liturgical calendar. So like the new year starts the first day of Advent. Advent is leading into Christmas. So Christmas kind of marks the beginning of the liturgical year. So that's kind of why that's in my mind anyway, Christmas is kind of the big one in the West. You can argue that maybe it's Easter, and that's fine. Those are definitely 1 and 2. Epiphany is a lot less known, I think. You actually don't hear very many people talk about it, but it's a bigger deal in the East than it is in the West, I'll say that. Any other questions, thoughts, or comments so far?
Yeah, I didn't really even think about it to my boys. My boys grew up looking forward to Three Kings Day every year.
Yeah.
It wasn't even on my radar. So,
Very interesting. And just based on where we live, we actually have a unique connection to it because it's a big deal in Louisiana especially. And we'll get into that in just a moment. But basically, that's answering the first question. So what is the Epiphany? It's that. It is a celebration of Christ revealing himself through his baptism, through the coming of the wise men, and to a lesser degree, through the first miracle at the wedding in Cana. So,
Can I?
go ahead.
As far as traditions go, my boys, what we would do the night before, we would put grass all around the house and make little trails, and even to the toilet or something, and leave the toilet seat up. Say, oh, look at the camels, they got thirsty. And we always talk about the camels, and the camels would just make a mess everywhere.
Mhm.
And that was part of it.
Yeah.
You know,
I'm serious.
Yep.
Three Kings Day was a big production.
Yeah. No, and that's one of the common traditions. That's a common Western Christian tradition to leave out hay. Some people leave out carrots as treats for the camels. They left the toilets open so the camels could drink. But yeah, that's a common tradition. That's part of it, yeah. So that is a thing for sure. But let's ask the question, who celebrates it? We've already kind of gotten into it. The short answer is everybody really celebrates it. This is a holiday that is celebrated by Eastern Orthodox, it's celebrated by Roman Catholics, and it's celebrated by Protestants. Particularly Anglican churches like the Church of England or the Episcopalian Church in America or the Church of Canada or whatever, that whole branch, they celebrate it. Also, Lutherans celebrate it. Also, Methodists celebrate it. So, Charlie, I know, has some experience with the Methodists. This is a part of the Methodist liturgical calendar as well. Was this ever a thing in any of the churches you were at? Did they ever talk about it?
I was UMC and they a little bit.
Yeah, there's really two different kinds of Methodist churches. There are frontier Methodist churches, which are more kind of revivalist in nature, and then there are more like traditional liturgical Methodist churches that are more like Episcopalians, that are more high church, and there is a contrast. Both of those traditions exist within the Methodists.
I grew up thinking that Methodist church was just like Baptist church. I mean, you had 30 minutes of singing, 30 minutes of preaching. But if you got baptized, you got sprinkled. I thought that was it. Well, I visited a Methodist church, and it felt like I was in a Catholic church.
Yeah.
You know, with vestments.
Yep.
You know,
That's how I feel most of the Episcopalian.
For what?
Basically,
Okay.
a Protestant version of a Catholic church. A lot of things that they
Yeah,
do.
first time I saw that, I was like, are we in the right place? It says Methodist church out front.
Yeah.
It didn't feel Methodist at all.
Yeah, so that's because of, again, those two kind of different traditions within Methodism. If you go back east, and there's probably a lot more of a high church liturgical vibe in that area, but as you get out into the frontier, yeah. Yeah, it was that whole frontier thing, and it kind of grew out of the Anglican Church. It grew out of the Church of England in America before the Revolution. But they were frontier evangelists, and it was a revivalist movement, and so part of that is part of the tradition with the Wesleys and everything else. That's true. But all that to say, it is part of the Methodist tradition. So you've got Anglicans, Episcopalians, Lutherans, some Methodists. They all celebrate Epiphany to one. It's a part of the calendar anyway. I'll put it to you that way. So in short, all three of the major branches of Christianity do celebrate. I mentioned it. I'll say it again just very clearly. In the East, the emphasis is on Jesus' baptism. So amongst the Eastern Orthodox, in that area of the world, the emphasis is mostly on his baptism. And in the West, in Western Christianity, so in Roman Catholicism and in Protestant circles, which, as we know, are very closely related, right? So in the West, in Western Christianity, the emphasis is on the visit of the wise men. Three Kings Day, right? That's where that comes from. The whole emphasis is on the visitation of the wise men. And it is known as Three Kings Day, especially in like Spain and in the colonized world. So if you go down into South America, Central America, even India and Africa, places that were colonized by Europe, it mostly goes by the name of Three Kings Day. That appears to have been like the common name at that time in the late Middle Ages, during the Renaissance, that period. It appears to have been mostly known as Three Kings Day because that is how it is known throughout the Hispanic world and even in places like India and Africa, like I said as well. So, and that comes from, like I say, mostly the Spanish, the Portuguese, the Italians. They called it that even more than some of the other groups did. So, any questions then about who celebrates it? We know what it is and we know who celebrates it. Any questions or comments? That's good. I don't want us to think that when we look at these holidays and we look at these things, I don't want us to think like, oh, this is a Roman Catholic thing. Because the truth is, it's not a Roman Catholic thing. It's simply a Christian thing. And that's what we're fixing to learn. We're going to learn today that before Roman Catholicism, as we understood it, exists, before it ever existed, Christians were celebrating the Epiphany. And even people who very self-consciously do not identify as Roman Catholics, like the Orthodox and these different Protestant groups, they also celebrate the holidays. So liturgical calendars, Christian holidays, these are not quote-unquote Catholic things. These are Christian things. And I think it's good for us to understand them and to even embrace them to one degree or another. I think that it's good. And so that's what I'm trying to do myself personally. That's why we're here talking about it. Speaking of that, I want to talk about the history of the feast. And for that, I drew a timeline. I know you guys love it when I get my diagrams out. I know the writing's going to be kind of difficult to read if you're far away. I'll explain all this as I'm talking about it. So, the earliest reference of Christian people celebrating the baptism of our Lord, let me get this out of the way. The earliest reference to people celebrating the baptism of our Lord, we see around the year 200 AD. So in 200 AD, we have a letter from this guy whose name is Clement of Alexandria. And on my timeline here, I started it at 0, and I stretched it out to 400 over here. So this is like the first 400 years of Christianity represented on this timeline. Of course, 0 is roughly the time Jesus was born. I'm not here to quibble about dates right now. We're just going to say 0 is when Jesus was born, which means it was about 30 AD that Jesus died. So we're here on the timeline. And it was about AD 50 to 90, let's say, that the New Testament was being written. So everything that we know in and from the Bible comes from like this portion right here. This is the New Testament, the Gospels, the book of Acts, all of the epistles. That's happening right here. Now, as I mentioned, it was about AD 200, you have this guy named Clement, and he mentioned there is this group of people who are celebrating the baptism of Jesus, and they are celebrating on some certain day of some certain month according to the Egyptian calendar. Well, very big brain smart people looked at the Egyptian calendar and they translated it over into the Julian calendar. And what we find is that these Christians were celebrating the baptism of Jesus, he said, either on January the 6th or on January the 10th. So early January, around the year 8200, there is a written record of Christians celebrating the baptism of Christ on January the 6th. Which is now the day of Epiphany. And if he wrote this in the year 200, it's not unrealistic for us to suppose that this practice was going on before he wrote it down. And I don't know how long, so I'm just making an easy number, and I'm saying it's probable, it's possible that the Epiphany was being celebrated as early as 150 AD. If he's writing about it in 200, it is possible, it's reasonable to suppose that this had been going on for a while. So as early as 150 AD, there are Christians who are celebrating the baptism of Jesus Christ within just a couple generations after the New Testament is completed. Now, the years between 200 and 313 is known in church history kind of as a time of great persecution. If you know historically, this is happening during what is known as the 3rd century crisis in Rome. So in Rome in the 200s, it was a period of instability. There was a lot of emperors, there was a lot of economic issues, there was a lot of plague issues, and Rome's power and control over the world was greatly impacted during this 3rd century crisis. It was a really bad time for the Roman Empire, and they eventually were able to come out of that, but it took about 100 years for them to turn that around. And during that time, Christians became one of the main scapegoats in the Roman Empire. And we all know that during the early church there was persecution, but for this whole time of persecution, it was really kind of regional. It was specific. It was acute, you could say. It wasn't widespread chronic persecution all across the empire, but there was acute flare-ups of persecution, whether it be at the hands of the Jews in Antioch, or whether it be at the hands of Roman officials in Rome itself, or whether it be whatever. There were periods and instances of persecution popping up in the early church. But the difference is from the year 200 roughly to the year 313 AD, the persecution that Christians faced was widespread. It was empire-wide. It was according to the command of the empire itself, and it was very, very severe. So this was a time in history where the Roman Empire was trying to snuff out churches. It was confiscating and burning scriptures. It was putting people to death, especially bishops and pastors and church leaders. This was a time of systematic and widespread persecution of the Christian church throughout the Roman Empire. And that lasted for roughly 100 years in the 3rd century. That all came to a close by a guy by the name of, Constantine. And what did Constantine the Great do? Well, first of all, he made it so that Christianity was legal. A lot of people think that Constantine made Christianity the state religion. He did not do that. That's not something that Constantine did. Constantine made the Christian religion legal in the year 313 AD. So from that time to that time, it was a persecuted religion. It was illegal to be a Christian. But that all changed in 313, and this is known as the peace of the church. Because finally, for the first time in 100 years, there was peace. And the Christians weren't being hunted by the empire. And so between 313 then and Christianity eventually becoming the religion of the Roman Empire, that happened in 380, by the way. 380 AD, Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire. Now, in between that, so in between 313 and 380, which is when Christianity became legal and when it became the state religion, we have two very important pieces of documentation. One of them is like a festal calendar in the city of Rome. And this dates all the way back to about 350 AD. And in this festal calendar in the city of Rome, it identifies December 25th as being a celebration of the nativity of Jesus Christ. So all the way back to within like the first generation of Christianity being legal, you have it on a piece of paper that Christians were celebrating Christmas on 12/25. In a different part of the world, around the year 360, you have it again on a piece of paper documented that Christians were celebrating not only the nativity of Christ, but also his baptism on separate days during this same time of the year. So why did I go through that entire line of history? Here's what I'm saying. It appears that the Epiphany was being celebrated as early as 150 AD, right? And we know that immediately after the great persecution, within a single generation, it is already documented that Christians were celebrating not only the Nativity, but also the Epiphany at this time of year, whether it be late December, early January, specifically December 25th, January 6th. These things were documented historically even before Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire. So you can't say this was because Christianity was the official religion. No, this was happening before that, right? You can't say, oh, it was Constantine who did this. No, Constantine didn't really have anything to do with any of this. He kind of came into this world that already existed. Christians had been doing this thing already for over 100 years. So that's basically the timeline, the early timeline of how all of this went. Now, of course, as we understand, the separation between Eastern and Western Christianity really began to take off around this time. So in the Middle Ages, a lot of traditions developed in the East and a lot of traditions developed in the West. And some of the traditions that developed in the West was the emphasis on the wise men, this idea of Three Kings Day, various traditions and celebrations that went along with it. And so for that reason, the Epiphany looks very different in Western Christian circles than it does in Eastern Christian circles. But what I'm trying to communicate to us today is that this feast, this celebration, is a very, very old, ancient practice of the church, and it was going on really basically from the very beginning. And over time, of course, it kind of spread and did different things. But what we can see is that this is just an ancient celebration. This is an ancient Christian tradition to celebrate this holiday. So I'm going to pause there and say any questions, any comments about the history, the timeline, or any of the events around it. I know that was a lot of information. So go ahead.
When you say East and West dealing with Christianity, it's important people know what they actually mean. You had two different sections of the, after it became a legalized, allowable religion, in the future actually was divided up by two authorities, power structures of Constantinople and Rome. That's why today that's considered the Western sector, where the Vatican City is in Constantinople, and was it Justinian was the last one?
Yeah, he was one of the major ones.
Yeah, in 1500s.
Justinian was a little earlier, but yeah, that's pretty much exactly right. And I'm glad you point that out. So let me draw another map.
Unless you know what you're saying when you say Eastern Church.
Yeah, and so to kind of show this here, I'm going to draw a makeshift map of Europe. So we're going to say this is Britain, and this is the Iberian Peninsula. Y'all please just bear with me. This is Italy down here.
I see the boot.
This is Greece.
It's good.
This is that. North Africa is kind of down there. And then, you got like Europe. And, we're going to call this that's Constantinople.
I forget to draw the little football.
Yeah. This is Rome. We'll say this is London up here, just so everybody kind of has an idea. This is Spain. This is France. So this is my very bad map. Now, when I talk about Eastern and Western Christianity, you can almost imagine a line drawn right down the middle where Constantinople is. Of course, during this time that we were talking about on our timeline, this is about the same time where the western part of the Roman Empire is collapsing. And the strength of the Roman Empire actually is no longer in Rome. It's in the city Constantinople, which is like the new capital of the Roman Empire, basically. And it separates, you got Jerusalem over here, you've got Athens, you've got Antioch, you've got Ephesus. You've got all these major places of power over here close to the eastern side. But on the western side, all you really have is Rome. And you have the barbarian tribes, the Germanic tribes that are invading from northern Europe. So this is a much more civilized part of the world than this over here. This place over here has multiple very powerful city-states, with very established Christian traditions, whereas in the West you really just have Rome. And then you've got the pagan hordes at the north, right? So when I talk about Eastern versus Western Christianity, the Christian world under the jurisdiction of Rome is what I call Western Christians, right? And I'll just put an X there. And then this area over here is what we're calling Eastern Christians. And so Eastern Christians, it really is a matter of they are more east on the map. Like that's what we're talking about. And this became known as like the Eastern Orthodox, and they've got different things, even up here in kind of Eastern Europe with the Russians and the Ukrainians. And go ahead.
The Greek Orthodox came from where?
From Greece.
I know from Greece, but
Right.
Greece
is
on the
Greece
west
considered
side.
Western?
No, the Greece would be within the influence of the Eastern thing, because you can think about it. You got like Athens down here. You've got like Antioch up here. You've got Jerusalem.
So is that more of a schism
You got
for the Eastern Orthodox?
you got like Alexandria over here in Egypt. No, there's really no schism going on in here. The schism is between all of these different. They call them apostolic sees. They are ancient Christian churches that exist in and around the Eastern center of influence versus Rome.
I was thinking more
There was a
Russian
schism.
Orthodox as opposed to Greek Orthodox.
Yeah. And that's the Orthodox thing, really, it differs based on kind of where it is. So you've got Russian Orthodox, Ukrainian Orthodox, Greek Orthodox, Iranian, there's all these different Orthodox groups. They're essentially the same, but there are different like flavors based on the culture. Yeah.
There was
Right.
a battle, let's say the Catholic Church at the time, Universal Church, but
Yeah,
there was
basically the
power
jurisdiction of
structure
Rome.
battle between Rome and Constantinople and who they were going to follow. So there was a split there mostly. That's why you'll see that the Eastern Orthodox have like different calendars and stuff like that, and the way they honor the Lord and stuff, the requirements for salvation and stuff.
And like I say, it's important that we remember
The popes were not following the Eastern.
there is this dynamic here, right? You got like Athens and Corinth or whatever. You got Alexandria down here. So in the Christian world, like I mentioned earlier, there are all of these very ancient churches. I mean, the church in Antioch is the church that sent out the Apostle Paul. The church in Jerusalem was the initial Christian church. You've got these churches in Greece. You've got Alexandria, which is a powerful center down there in Egypt. So in this area of the world, there are all of these established, powerful churches. And then over here, once again, you have Rome.
Yeah.
And Rome was basically saying, hey, we're in charge of everybody. And these guys over here were like, yeah, no, you're not, actually. You're not in charge of everybody. We are all equal as bishops among these apostolic churches. And Rome was like, no, actually, we're above all of you. And that's a major reason for the schism, for the break, which happened around the year 1000, roughly. And, but yeah, that was like all of these. And so the way the Eastern Orthodox works, I didn't mean to get into this, but we're getting into it anyway. The way that they work is instead of having one guy, the Pope, they have a council of all of the bishops of these major jurisdictions. And it's still that way to this day. So there's like the Bishop of Constantinople is like the leader, but you also have the Bishop of Alexandria, the Bishop of Jerusalem, the Bishop of Antioch, etc., etc. And that's how the Eastern Orthodox kind of governs itself. Whereas in the West, the Roman Catholic Church is headed up by the Bishop of Rome, which is the Pope, and Protestant churches, which originated kind of up here in Europe, they don't have that kind of central structure like these other ones do. So that's where the difference there is. But
What's really neat though is that all of these Orthodox churches and the Catholic Church, they're in full communion with each other. I mean, you can go either way and be in the service and do the sacraments.
And most of the churches you go in over there, they look just like a Catholic church. The priests would be wearing white robes with black along the bottom, waving great big lanterns of incense and all these other things that you find in a regular Catholic church.
And all of that stuff you can find in some Protestant churches too. The difference there is that is called a liturgical style of worship. It is a high church style of worship. And it's really kind of an ancient style of worship that began to crop up around the same time some of these other things did. And yeah, so that is very common. But when I talk about Eastern Christians, I'm talking about literally Christians who lived on the eastern side of the Roman Empire. And when I talk about Western Christians, I'm talking about Christians that lived on the western side of the Roman Empire, including Rome and everything that happened in Europe, which would turn into the Protestants, right? We are a part of that Western tradition. As European Protestants, we're a part of that Western Christian tradition. I'm glad you brought that out. Does that clear anything up, or did it just make it more confusing?
It's wonderful.
Very good.
It's already confusing, but it does help you to understand whenever you say Eastern or Western, what you're actually talking about. Not
Right.
talking about China or anything, you're talking about that line right by Constantinople.
Yeah.
Everything to the
Istanbul.
right, we consider like Middle East or
Yeah.
Orthodox Russian all the way up beyond the Russian Orthodox or
Because you got to remember, like, the Roman Empire encapsulated, like, this whole area. And so around the time, part of the reason why the Roman Empire did not fall in the 3rd century is because they restructured their government, and they said, well, you have control of this area, and someone else has control of this area, and that area, and that area. And then eventually Constantine himself reunified the empire, but he established a new capital city in the east, because this is where all the commerce was. This is where everything was. So this became the capital, and Constantinople stood as the capital until like 1450 or something, 1452 or something, when it was overran by the Turks, I believe, the Islamic Turks. So that lasted for a really long time.
Istanbul.
Yeah, that's what it's known as today, is Istanbul in Turkey. So, yeah, but that's what we mean when we talk about Eastern versus Western Christians, that we are talking about, like, looking at a map, those who lived in the East and those who lived in the West. And it's important for us to understand that as Protestants, we are Western Christians, by and large. We were developed in the West. We sprung out of Roman Catholicism, if you will. We are very Western in our orientation, the way that we approach the entire faith. So Protestants are much closer to Rome than we are to Orthodox in the way that we practice our faith and the way that we think about the faith. But that's because we share this kind of Western history and tradition. That's why Protestants celebrate Three Kings Day as opposed to the baptism of Jesus on the Epiphany, right? That's a Western thing. So I'm going to sum this up by saying this. So in sum, the Epiphany, or the Theophany, as it's known in the East, is one of the most ancient holidays of the church, and it celebrates the revelation of Christ both in his divinity and to the Gentiles. This feast has been celebrated by or on or around January the 6th since as early as 150 AD, and it remains a central holiday to every major branch of Christianity. So Orthodox, Catholics, and Protestants all celebrate this holiday. It's been celebrated for a very, very long time. That's what we're talking about when we talk about Epiphany. So we found out what it is, we know who celebrates it, and we learned some of the basic history of where it came from. Any questions, any comments, anything at this point before we get into some of the traditions? Move this out of the way. I think my Italy is backwards. Is my Italy backwards? Is it supposed to be going this way or this way? I can't even remember.
Go on the right way.
It's a boot, yeah.
Just put a little football right there by the boot.
Yeah, I ran out of room. I cut off North Africa completely. It's okay. It is what it is. No, Sicily doesn't exist anymore. Just ignore that completely. Let's talk about some of the traditions surrounding the Feast of the Epiphany. So the earliest traditions, this is some of the most ancient traditions. One of them is that people would write the initials of the wise men. And so this is what they would write. A C, which stands for Caspar. An M, which stands for Melchior. Yep. And then a B, which stands for Balthazar. Now, how do they know these were the names of the wise men? I have no idea.
Tradition.
Yeah, nobody knows. There's no way of actually knowing. Was there 3 of them? Were they kings? What were their names? Like, nobody actually knows any of that. But they would write these 3 letters as initials of the 3 kings, right? Of the 3 wise men. Some people even say it could stand for a Latin phrase the Latin phrase, I'm going to try to say this, Christus mansionem benedicte, which means may Christ bless this house. So Christus, Christ, mansionem, house, and then benedicte, which are benedicat, which is to bless. So may Christ bless this house. CMB, right? That's an ancient tradition, and that continues on even in the East. So even in the East today, as I mentioned, the emphasis is on Jesus' baptism. So some of the traditions in the Eastern Orthodox Church around this holiday is this is a time where they do baptisms of new converts. So like in the Roman Catholic Church, they usually do their baptisms on Easter. Easter is like we're ready to baptize anybody. The second they're ready to be baptized, we'll fill the tub up and baptize them. But in these other churches, they don't really do that. They usually have like one time during the year where they baptize everybody. And for the Orthodox, Epiphany is commonly the time where they do their baptisms. So, and that makes sense because it's celebrating Christ and his baptism. Another major thing that they do during this time is house blessings. Just like you write the things to bless the house, well, they still do that. They bless people's houses. But they'll go through and they'll anoint the walls of the house, and they have this stuff that they sprinkle, and they write the CMB on the doorpost, and they pray their prayers, and they do all their things. But house blessing is a very common tradition that people do on the day of Epiphany, especially in the East. I mentioned earlier that it is one of the top 3 liturgical holidays, Easter and Pentecost, and then the Epiphany. So though that's in the East, some traditions in the West. So, like I say, it developed kind of independently over here. They have things that they do. Well, in the West, we also have things that we do. So one of the major traditions in the West is the day of Epiphany. That's the day we start taking down our Christmas decorations, right? So the Christmas season, you've probably heard of this, the 12 days of Christmas. Yeah.
Take down what? The what you said?
Christmas decorations.
What?
Yeah. He said, who decorates their house for Christmas, he said.
No, I'm wondering who takes it down.
Oh. Who takes them down. But yes, so we've heard of the 12 days of Christmas, and what that is it is the 12 days in between Christmas Day and the Feast of the Epiphany. The 12 days in between are what are known as the 12 days of Christmas. So on the 12th day of Christmas, that is the very end. And in some place, like in England, for instance, some of the English traditions were at the end of the 12 days of Christmas, there would be a big feast. People would eat king cake. We all know what king cake is. This is an Epiphany thing. King cake comes from the Epiphany. In fact, you stick a little thing in it, and the idea is, different things, different places have different traditions. Sometimes it's you have to buy the next cake. Sometimes it's you get like a reward or a piece of candy or something, whatever. But the whole idea of the king cake where you get a little toy in it, that... Yeah, a baby, or yeah, and sometimes it's a crown or different things. Whatever the toy may be, within that is it has to do with the Epiphany. And that's something that Christians have been doing for centuries, is doing the king cake thing. That has to do with the Feast of Epiphany. Some of the other English traditions is that the day of Epiphany was like April Fool's Day. It would be like a day of practical jokes. So it'd be like messing with people on the day of Epiphany. That's an English tradition. It is the end of the Yule log. So the day of Epiphany is the day where you finally let the Yule log burn out and you keep back some of the ashes or whatever to start the next one, whatever it is. I don't do a Yule log, I don't know. Of course, it would be marked with special foods, a feast. I mentioned the king cake already. Another Western tradition is the day of Epiphany was usually the day where they would announce Easter. Easter is going to be on this day. And of course, we think that's stupid. Why would they do that? Well, you got to remember, people didn't have calendars in the year 1300, right? So it's not like you couldn't just pull out your phone and know what day it was. So people these holidays were announced ahead of time. And Easter typically would be announced on the day of Epiphany. And that's an old tradition. I mentioned earlier, there are some things that are unique to the New World and in the colonial areas. And one of those things is that it's often known, as our brother said, as Three Kings Day. So a lot of places call it Epiphany or the Theophany, but in a lot of places it's also known as Three Kings Day. And a lot of Spanish-speaking places in particular, it's known as Three Kings Day. And this also happens to be, this is the connection to Louisiana, so the Feast of Epiphany is the beginning of the festal season. It's the first day of the festal season leading up to Mardi Gras, which leads into Advent, which leads into all of the other things. So that whole season starts with Epiphany. And a lot of people say that the time between January 6th and February 2nd, which I believe is the beginning of Mardi Gras, that is known as the period of the king cake. So this is king cake season, where starting with the Epiphany all the way up into Mardi Gras, people are eating king cake, right? It's like a prolonged celebration of Epiphany, leading into the season of Lent. And you might ask yourself, why is that so strong in Louisiana? Well, Louisiana has a very strong French influence, and the French have a very strong Catholic influence. So some of these Catholic liturgical traditions that did not survive in the more Puritan areas of America, they did survive in the more Roman Catholic areas like Louisiana. So for that reason, some of those traditions run strong in Louisiana, where they didn't, like, those things were not a part of like the British colonies, because there was a very strong Protestant, even Puritan, anti-Catholic disposition in early American history. So that's pretty much that. Those are the celebrations, everything. I guess in conclusion, I would say this. Epiphany is an ancient and important Christian holiday, and what it does is it signifies the end of one season and the beginning of a new season, as we are celebrating the incarnation and revelation of Jesus Christ. So this is all about we're thinking about the revelation of Christ, the wise men, his baptism, Christ revealing himself as the Son of God. That's what Epiphany is about. That's what it's about as a holiday. That's what the Epiphany season is about. It's all of these different things. And we answered today those 4 questions. What is it? Who celebrates it? What is its history? And what are some of the traditions? So my hope is that you learned something tonight. My hope is that, you learned something. I know I learned a bunch. I'm going to open it up to final questions, final comments. We got a couple minutes here. So what do you guys think about all of this information?
We'll forget it tomorrow.
We'll forget it tomorrow,
Too
yeah.
much stuff, yeah.
So true. How y'all like that fire hose of information I gave you there? Yeah.
I kind of liked it, but
It's
it
interesting.
was nice to know where some of the king came from London. And
Yeah.
so it was really.
Yeah, the king cake is directly connected to Epiphany. Our brother mentioned some of the other fun traditions. He mentioned something I think was good. There are lots of places like Spain, places like in South America, where Christmas is not as big of a holiday as it is for us. In fact, a lot of places, they don't do presents on Christmas, none of that. The day of presents is Three Kings Day. That's when you get your presents. That's when, and that, of course, corresponds to the gifts that the wise men brought to Jesus, right? And that makes sense if we think about it. But, yeah, this Three Kings Day, there is that tradition of gift-giving, feasting, celebrating, all that kind of stuff goes with it as well.
I do want to say that all of this stuff here basically is what man interpreted and developed of how we'll honor the Lord. It's not like required, it's not holy.
Right.
I mean, if you want to have Christmas and remember the birth of Jesus, that's great, I do believe there's certain times of the year, Easter and Pentecost, that are very special. That's the Bible specifically says these are special days, and to honor them, a man has developed these things. That's what I just don't want to get into, because some people honor them so much and they become unholy, they become tradition. Then men start making rules and superstitions around them, and you can get yourself. That's what the Catholic Church has gotten into a lot of stuff that is basically just superstitious, or what they develop, not what God says it is.
Yeah, and I think that's important to bring out. It's important to point out that, there are lots of Christian holidays, and these are things that have been developed over time. Like, none of the Christian holidays are commanded by Scripture. Not Christmas, not Easter, not Epiphany, none of the saint days, none of them. Scripture doesn't command us to do any of that. These are things that Christians have done historically that we continue to do. They are traditions that have developed. And we kind of have an allergy to tradition, which we should not have. And the problem is not tradition itself. The problem is when tradition begins to supersede the authority of Scripture. That's when we begin to run into issues. Those are the kind of issues that Jesus had with the Pharisees. So, that being said, there's nothing wrong with celebrating these days. And like I mentioned, I myself am trying to incorporate this traditional liturgical calendar into my life because I feel like it puts me more in step with the Christian tradition as a whole. And that's important to me. So I'm trying to make that a part of my life. But remember what Scripture actually teaches us about holy days, about these kind of things in 1 Corinthians 14, or not 1 Corinthians, but Romans 14, and in other places where Paul is talking about if one person esteems one day as holy, but another person esteems all days as the same, what business is it of you? One person considers it holy unto God. One person considers all days the same unto God. Either way, they're doing it unto God, so let's not judge our brethren, but let us judge ourselves, basically, is what he says. And that rule applies with Epiphany. Just like it applies with Christmas, just like it applies with Easter, just like it applies with all of the holidays that we talk about. These are not things that we can bind on the conscience of people, but I do believe that it is a good thing and worth exploring and adapting to our own situation if we can and if we want to. So, yeah, that's good to bring out, though.
Whatever you do, do it under Christ.
Yeah. Yeah.
You'll be
I
good.
don't know.
What I like about the holidays and the liturgical calendar and everything is it's literally ordering time around Christ. It's like Christ becomes the ordering principle of everything in my life, including the way that I reckon time. Like, I reckon myself not as being in football season, but as being in the season of Epiphany or whatever. I reckon myself not as being in summer break, but as being in the season of Pentecost. I'm looking forward not to, whatever X, Y, or Z fake holiday. I'm not looking forward to New Year's Day as a holiday. I'm looking forward to the Christian celebration of Epiphany. So what I really like about these calendars is it gives me a way to order my entire life in such a way that it's revolving around Christ and worship and the life of the church. That's what I find so interesting and fascinating about it to me. And that's not something I would want to impress upon other people, but it's something that I'm trying to embrace in my own life because I think it's very interesting and good.
January 6th was also a holiday for Wassailing, where people would go dancing and drinking from house to house to house, and you had to entertain.
What was that called?
Wassailing.
Wassailing?
Yeah, W-A-I, or W-A-S-S-A-I-L-I-N-E, wassail.
In Germany.
It's also a drinking
I
thing.
heard it say it's the hot wassail, like spiced tea,
Yes.
kind of, yeah.
Yep. But you would go from house to house to house,
Uh-huh.
drinking and eating.
Drinking, you mean getting drunk. So I know over in Germany, I lived in Germany, they had a thing every year about this time, it's called Fauci. It was basically sort of like what the Catholic Church says, Fat Tuesday, you can do whatever you want, and then you're going to repent on Ash Wednesday, so get your sinning out of the way. Over there, the wife can take off the wedding ring, it lasts for 2 weeks. That's what they have, usually beer fest, not the fall one, but they consider this spring, even though it's still winter time over there.
Uh-huh.
But it was just like, you can do whatever you want for 2 weeks, basically. Sin as much as you want, drink as much as you want, go to house and stuff like that. It's called Fauci. It's really big over there, at least in the part of Germany that I live in.
Yeah.
Bavaria.
I've never heard of either one of those things
It's
before.
pretty wild.
But
they don't come out of
Wassailing
religious
was more of
things.
an English thing. It was more in England.
Okay.
Although I think Germanic peoples did a version of it, but it was pretty big.
I think it come out of the Catholic Church, a lot of this, because there's a period where you can basically, I'm not saying you encourage you to sin, but if you're going to sin, get it out of the way now, then you can have your repentance come up.
When you die before.
Yeah.
Yeah, as long as you don't die first.
You're going to go through a period of, you better consecrate yourself. Show up at this time.
Isn't there a song, Here We Go, a wassailing? Yeah.
There you go, well, that's something there. There you go.
Very good.
We've been singing that all this time?
Now, all of you are experts on the Feast of Epiphany. Now, all of you can entertain the cashiers and the waiters and everybody you come into contact with.
I done did it.
He done did it. So, yeah, there's that. I want to, Lord willing, next week we're going to get back into our study in the Synoptics. I think we'll take a little bit of time to kind of recap and get our feet back under us. It's been a while since we were looking at it, so we'll kind of refresh and recap and get back where we were, and then we're going to get back in the flow of kind of our regular Bible study. Actually, next week we have a missionary who's coming. So, next week there's a missionary, but after that we're going to get back into the flow of regular Bible study, and I'm looking forward to all of that. I don't think there's any announcements, as far as I know. Does anybody know? Besides the business meeting, so be at the business meeting the last Sunday of the month, and that's really all I got.